Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our special program for district permittees and elected officials. I'm Tim Loftus. I'm the general manager with the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District. And I want to first thank our host, the City of Buda, for providing this wonderful venue, and also our partner in organizing this event, the Hill Country Alliance. The Conservation District remains in a persistent drought. We're approaching 2 years since the initial declaration in June of 2022. And while we've received some rain of late, we're still, the aquifers reflect a deficit since drought began, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that later. So we have 5 presentations to share with you this morning. And before I introduce our first speaker, I'm going to ask everyone to please mute your cell phone. So we're going to begin with our Texas State Climatologist, Dr. Neilsen-Gammon. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Neilsen-Gammon.
Thank you. I'm going to give you an update on what's been happening with the drought in this region, where things stand right now, and what the outlook is, both short-term and long-term. So we measure drought through various drought indices, which typically compare things to normal conditions. And some indices focus on a particular time interval, like the Palmer Drought Index, which is the most common one, looks at essentially the most sensitive to 6 to 9 month time scales. What I'm showing here is a standardized precipitation index, which is focused just on precipitation, but you can specify the time scale you want to look at. So in the upper left, we got the 1 month time scale, then 3 months, then 6 months, then 12 months, 24 and 36 months. And what you see is for the past 6 months or so, things have been pretty close to normal around this part of the state. The scale, by the way, is at the top of the title slide, so yellows and reds are drought, extremely below normal. The minus 0.5 value corresponds to about the 30th percentile, so about 1 in 3 years will be that dry. And then the other side is the excessive wetness, which for the most part we haven't had to worry about too much. And the winter's been a little bit wetter to the north than to the south. Some of the reservoirs up around Temple, which were at historic lows, have managed to fill up due to the rains this winter. But that's definitely not the case for the Highland Lakes and lakes farther south. Where the big rainfall deficits show up is at the 2 and 3 year time scales. Essentially, the near normal rainfall that we've had the past several months has made the plants fairly happy. They've greened up nicely. We've got a good wildfire season going on. But the deep soil moisture and the hydrologic system is still running low because of the long-term dryness. And that dryness has been more severe to the west than to the east, which of course can make a bit of a public perception problem when you've got dry conditions in the recharge zone, but not so much where people live. So here's an example of a station out west. This is Fisher's Store, which is near Canyon Lake. And what we're looking at here is the past 3 years worth of precipitation from May to May, so it's up to date for the present day. And the brown line is the normal rainfall rate, and the green is what's actually happened. And if the brown and the green lines are tracking at about the same slope, that means we're getting the normal amount of rainfall. And for the past 6 to 9 months, that's basically been the case. But if you go back to the summer of 2023, it was a very dry summer. And 2022 was a dry summer as well, and winter was not especially wet. So even though, say 2 years ago, things were running pretty close to normal, it's been dry since then. And I do the math, they've had about 30 fewer inches of rainfall over the past 15 months, 25 to 30 months or so than they normally would, which is close to 1 year's worth of rainfall. Farther east, here for example in San Marcos, a volunteer station, things have been a bit wetter, especially over the past 9 months or so. The green line has been creeping up closer to the brown line, which means above normal rainfall amounts. But still hasn't been enough to overcome the deficit of rainfall that had been built up over the 15 months beforehand. So if you look at the past 2 years combined, things are still running about 10 to 15 inches below normal. And it's basically the same story wherever you look. This is, excuse me, this is 3 years worth of data for every single station in the region. And I've got that diagonal line to show you what a steady pace of rainfall would look like. And what you see in the middle part of this diagram is every single station has been showing rainfall that hasn't been able to keep pace with that steady amount. And we've gotten decent rainfall the past 6 months or so, which is enough to keep up with a normal rate, but it's not enough to overcome the deficit. Now, in combination with that lack of rainfall, we've also had unusually high temperatures. On an annual basis, Central Texas in 2022 was up around the top 10th percentile historically, which means out of the past 125 years or so, it was in the top 12 or 13. 2023, that calendar year, was even hotter. In fact, it was the hottest year on record for a large fraction of the state, including all of Central Texas. And 2024 so far has been fairly warm as well. Again, it's sort of pushing top 10 or top 15 status. Part of the reason for that is the dry conditions we had during the summer, which tends to elevate temperatures. But it's been warm throughout the year, and this hasn't just been local to Texas. Global temperatures have been setting records for the past year or so. This is a plot of sea surface temperatures compared to normal across the globe. And normal is a fairly recent period, 1991 to 2020. So when we're talking 1 or 2 degrees Celsius warmer than that across large swaths of the globe, that's a fairly significant warm temperatures. In the summertime, and basically half the time in the winter, our air comes from the southeast, from the Gulf of Mexico. And it's probably been over the ocean for a while. And so that means it's starting out warm, and it's starting out warmer than normal, and probably more humid than normal also before it reaches Texas. And it doesn't have much time to change its temperature characteristics while it's over the state. So as long as we've got these warm temperatures upstream, we can reasonably expect above normal temperatures in Texas. That's consistent with the seasonal forecast. These are the official outlooks from the Climate Prediction Center. They cover overlapping 3-month periods. The latest one actually came out this morning, I think, but I haven't had a chance to look at it. But it's probably not a whole lot different from this, which is a lot of oranges and reds and no blues, which means, well, except for parts of Alaska, which means enhanced chances of above normal temperatures. Basically, this is saying that when we're in the dark red, there's more than a 50% chance that we're going to be in the top third of historic temperatures over the past few decades, so significantly above normal. And conversely, chances of being significantly below normal are decreased. It's gotten relatively easy to make temperature outlooks because of the warming trend that we've seen in the warm ocean temperatures. It's very hard for temperatures to be significantly below normal. In fact, we've only had one of those years out of the past 10 or so. Same sort of pattern persists through next winter. So up top is November, December, January. These outlooks all the way to April, May, June of 2025. And certainly still the story is warm in Texas. The pattern changes a bit because in the wintertime, our weather is influenced quite a bit by El Nino and La Nina. And La Nina tends to produce relatively warm temperatures across the south and cooler temperatures across the north. El Nino tends to be cool in the south and warm in the north. So if you were to look at the seasonal outlook from last year, it would be sort of the flip side of this, with warm expected in the north and near normal in the south. The reason we don't see a lot of blue on these maps is, again, the long-term warming trend. La Nina is trying to make the northern United States cooler than normal, but that's in the face of a long-term warming trend, so those effects sort of cancel. Whereas in the southern United States, the expectation is warming due to the long-term trend plus unusually warm due to La Nina. Now here's what we've been dealing with, or we expect to see happen with El Nino and La Nina. Last winter was an El Nino winter, which tends to be, like I say, relatively cool and wet, and it was somewhat wet as it turned out. Right now, temperatures have cooled off. They've gotten close to normal in the tropical Pacific. If we take a look at that map of sea surface temperatures in the tropical Pacific, you see a ton of cooler water extending from the northern part of South America across to the equator. That's the key area we monitor for El Nino and La Nina. And the expectation is those below normal temperatures are going to spread and intensify, leading to La Nina conditions by July, August, September. That's what the JAS stands for. And the chances of seeing La Nina conditions through the winter are greater than 80%. This is normal. Things tend to cycle between El Nino and La Nina. Sometimes they're sort of near in the middle, which is called neutral conditions, which is what we have right now, indicated by the gray bars. But things are strongly expected to kick into La Nina. Now, La Nina has its biggest effect on our temperatures and rainfall in the wintertime, but it also matters for the summer as well, because it has an influence on hurricane activity. So one expectation based on this is that we would have an active hurricane season next year. The reason for that being that conditions in the tropical Atlantic tend to favor hurricane development during La Nina. There's less what we call wind shear, with air blowing in different directions at different altitudes, so storms can stay together and intensify rather than being ripped apart. That's one aspect of the hurricane forecast. Another aspect is the sea surface temperatures again, which are unusually warm where the hurricanes normally develop, out in the tropics as well as the Gulf of Mexico. So both of those factors are pointing toward an active hurricane season, and consequently every outlook I've seen so far has said that it's likely to be active. Now, one might hope that that means that we'll have a wetter than normal summer, although in the face of the chance of hurricane activity. But really what happens is hurricanes are sort of concentrated areas of thunderstorms, and if you're 500 or 1,000 miles from a hurricane, you've got clear, sunny weather. So it doesn't really enhance the overall amount of rainfall. It just concentrates it within storms, which means it makes knowing how much rain we're going to get this summer even harder to predict, because it depends on whether or not a storm is going to strike our area or not. And it's basically turns things into feast or famine. So the outlook for precipitation for the summer for central Texas is, at least with the last month's outlook, near normal. So equal chances above or below normal. The latest forecast models I've seen say are leaning toward perhaps wetter conditions, which would be good. But as we go from, say, June, July, August, the top center, to September, October, November, the bottom center, the chances of dry conditions spread eastward, and by October, November, December, things are starting to look like La Nina for rainfall, which is dry to the south, wet to the north. So we've had good rainfall, not great rainfall the past several months. That's expected to continue. Rainfall in the summertime mainly has an impact, not so much on recharging aquifers, but in reducing water demand, because a large portion of the water demand is people watering lawns and gardens and so forth. And if we have a wet summer, that demand goes down, and that enables the aquifer levels to stay up a bit. Now, one thing I like to emphasize with this is that even though this is how the odds are tilting, it's not necessarily how things will actually be. Here's a plot of the cool season rainfall in Texas. Higher is wetter compared to the El Nino conditions. 2024, what we just had is that star. It was a fairly strong El Nino, but it didn't quite perform as much as one would hope, given that it was such a strong El Nino. 2021 and 2022 were both La Nina years, and they came out unusually dry as expected. 2024-25, next winter, somewhere in that neighborhood also, so it's possible we get lucky. It's possible we'll have one of those dots in the upper left, but there's a lot more dots in the lower left, which means below normal rainfall is a lot more likely this winter than is above normal rainfall. Okay, long term, it would be great to know exactly what was going to happen to droughts in this area. The main driver of drought conditions is rainfall, obviously, but it turns out rainfall is not particularly easy to project. Climate models give different trajectories. Some say wetter, the majority say drier, but the average change is actually pretty small compared to how much variation there is from year to year or even decade to decade, just from natural variability because of things like El Nino and La Nina. So we don't really have a good expectation of what's going to happen with annual rainfall, and therefore the drought outlook based on that is unclear. But as you saw, temperatures are going up. That's an easy thing to project. And that means that when you have a dry period, things dry out faster because there's greater evaporation rates. That's true for water supplies, for surface water. And it's true for soil as well, which is important for aquifer recharge. Plants become a little bit more efficient at using water, so the water use efficiency goes up. So that sort of mitigates the drying trend somewhat, but not completely. And rainfall is also expected to be more erratic, both on a day-to-day basis and month by month. Heavy rainfall becomes more intense. We've seen that increase at a greater rate than average precipitation in Texas so far. The effect of that intensity of rainfall on a day-to-day basis sort of depends upon what aspect of water supply you care about. It has very different impacts on surface water compared to groundwater. For surface water and also for water use, soil moisture, as I mentioned, matters a great deal, and climate models are very consistent in projecting a decrease in soil moisture. This is an average of a bunch of high-end projections, so they're the sort of the worst case scenario for global temperatures. If you want a realistic scenario, maybe reduce the magnitudes by a factor of 2 or so. But that still implies about a 1% per decade decline in soil moisture, with corresponding declines in infiltration to subsoil and into aquifers At the same time, water demand might go up because of this trend. For surface water, you've got this drying trend, which would mean that rainfall would tend to soak into the soil more than run off. But on the other hand, you've got more heavy rainfall, which tends to run off more. And as a result of that, we get the average runoff projected to increase, although the uncertainty is large, indicated by the hatching. And what's actually happening is typical runoff amounts decrease, but if you have very heavy rainfall, you can actually have a bigger flood than normal. So that's not really what you want for surface water supplies. You'd like to have steady inflow, but this says that the floods get bigger, but water inflows decrease during the drier periods, which is sort of what we're seeing in central Texas over the past few years. With even though we've had near normal rainfall, we've had below normal inflow to lakes and reservoirs. Unfortunately, we don't have that sort of trade-off with soil moisture. Both factors indicate drying. So the long-term expectation is for a drying trend, which you could call aridity or you could call drought. But if we're really lucky, we get more rainfall, that could cancel a lot of that effect. If we're unlucky and end up with less rainfall in the future, then things get even worse. So we've got long-term drought. It's mainly to the west of this area, or the hill country. We're expecting a warm summer and possibly normal rainfall, but unfortunately another dry winter is on tap, probably. And we've got a long-term trend which says rainfall becomes a bit more erratic and soils tend to dry out. Some of the resources I use for the figures I've shown are up here on this slide, including my contact information. Okay, well, thank you very much.